Family Guy in recent years has had a larger than normal percentage of what I would call irregular episodes that take the cast of the show and put them in a parody of some movie or a different time period or whatever. Something I noticed about these particular episodes is that they are often a bit more unfocused, both in terms of story and in terms of comedy. Why are there so many of these irregular episodes? What is wrong with them? And can Family Guy still make decent, normal episodes? The first episode I want to analyze today is Season 24's High School History, which is one of those episodes where the runtime is split up equally between 3 parodies, with them parodying 3 historical wars in this one. These 3 parody episodes have become pretty infamous in modern Family Guy due to their overuse. The first time they did an episode like this was all the way back in Season 7 with 3 Kings that parodied movies based on Stephen King books. But back then, an episode like this was a unique novelty and seemed to stem from the desire for the team behind the show to parody these particular subjects, whereas now they feel like a bit of a crutch, a way to fill the episode order without having to come up with an actual story, and instead rely on some bits that are related to whatever thing you're parodying. Heck, High School History isn't even the only 3 parodies episode this season, with Playtime being a parody of 3 plays. And arguably, Viewer DMs is another episode with the same formula that just isn't focused on any specific theme and just kind of does random parodies under the guise of being a viewer mail episode. But just being a commonly used formula for an episode doesn't make these 3 parody episodes inherently bad. It's how poorly they are presented that outs them as the formulaic padding that they are. In order to demonstrate how High School History falls into this trap, I am going to directly compare elements of its writing to an episode that I think is just an overall better version of the same concept, Untitled Griffin Family History. Let's start by discussing each episode's framing. The framing of High School History is that Brian is doing court-ordered community service, which comes up between each history parody where he interrupts another character doing something to present the next segment, with the other character sometimes guessing what Brian did to get himself in trouble. As a framing device, it does work, especially when considering the tone of a show like Family Guy. Instead of something like a history lesson being something one would learn in a classroom or through a documentary, it's instead presented by a ne'er-do-well talking dog, which is consistent with the relative lack of seriousness as presented in the history parodies themselves. However, while the framing device for High School History is good, we can start to see how it could have been better if we compare it to the framing device of Griffin Family History, which is also an episode that parodies certain historical time periods. The way Griffin Family History is framed is that the Griffin house is being broken into, and Peter takes the family into a secure panic room in the attic and shares details of what he knows about his ancestry with his family, as he believes that it is important for them to know their family history in case they are killed by the criminals. What makes these 2 framing devices so different is the stakes of each one and how it relates to the respective character who is telling each history. By having the family holed up in a panic room while their house is being burglarized, the Griffin family histories are communicated to be personally important to Peter, as in this life or death situation, he believes it to be the most important thing he needs to share with his family, which prompts the audience to care a little bit more about each parody. And if you can get your audience to care more about the story, the comedy thrives. Brian's community service has the opposite effect. It makes him disconnected from the parodies because he isn't even choosing to present it, he's being forced to. Griffin Family History's parodies also all focus entirely on a different version of Peter himself, which more directly connects him to each story. Whereas in High School History, while Brian does appear as some of the parody characters, he isn't the main focus, which further disconnects him from the historical periods he is trying to tell us about. Griffin Family History is also helped by the fact that Peter was just a lot more likable as a character in this era, which I think is best illustrated by how this episode handles Meg being the butt of the joke, like in this moment.
I heard a noise. Is somebody downstairs?
Oh God, Meg, you startled me. I'm sorry.
And this moment.
Dad!
Have fun at the dance, Meg. I hope she does. That kid really deserves it.
Both of these moments portray Peter as oblivious rather than malicious towards Meg, which still allows for a little bit of mean-spirited comedy, but doesn't sacrifice you liking him as a character, and thus being able to better enjoy following his stories. Now, this is not to say that the Brian framing device is awful. Again, I think there is merit to it, but it is certainly a more simple framing device, a quick way to just get you right into the parodies, which would have been just fine if the parodies themselves were anything memorable. Like, if you look at the French Revolution parody, it's just a bunch of trite, semi-disconnected jokes jokes that have something slightly to do with the French Revolution.
I even got laid off from my job pitchforking loose hay here and moving it to there.
And
we should take advantage and foment a revolution. Yeah, and definitely not for our own personal advancement.
And
if you could tell everyone to get busy eating cake, that would famously help things.
These jokes are funny, and the latter two do directly comment on the French Revolution, but they amount to little more than just random observations that are relevant to the time period. And that's the case with just about every other joke, funny or otherwise, in the entire episode. If we compare this French Revolution segment from High School History to the Nate Griffin segment of Untitled Griffin Family History, we can see how that segment told a stronger story and how that led to it having funnier and more memorable jokes. The Nate Griffin segment is focused entirely around Peter's ancestor, unlike the French Revolution segment that jumps between the King and Queen Chris and Meg, Robespierre and Dantal, Brian and Stewie, and Peasant Peter and the guys, depending on what sort of joke it feels like telling in that moment. The singular focus on Nate Griffin allows for the narrative of this segment to focus more on the specific jokes it is trying to tell, using the sensitive subjects of racism and slavery, and it succeeds in doing this by establishing Nate Griffin as a lovable yet oblivious sort of guy.
Wow, you're a different color than me. Would you like to be equals?
This principle can also be applied to the Moses Griffin segment. Unlike the Nate Griffin segment, which is the longest segment in the episode at 6 minutes, the Moses Griffin segment is a bit under a minute and a half, but it still succeeds comedically due to its focus on Moses and it using that serious biblical figure to make jokes.
Commandment number 4. When we pass a billboard, please don't read it out loud.
Danny Gans, Entertainer of the Year.
What did I say?
Once again, this moment uses Peter as a character in order to serve the comedy. Peter's character archetype is that he's the everyman, whereas the character archetype of Moses is that of an authority figure. What makes combining these two very different characters into one funny is that you take a power structure like the 10 Commandments and replace the serious rules with funny ones about not complaining about it being too hot.
Commandment number 2. There's nothing I can do about the sun.
If we compare Moses Griffin to the second segment of High School History where Peter is Abraham Lincoln, we can ask ourselves, what is the point of Peter being Abraham Lincoln other than Peter is the main character of Family Guy and Abraham Lincoln is the most prominent figure of the Civil War? With Moses Griffin, the dichotomy of their personalities is what made the humor of that segment work. But the Civil War segment just kind of comes down to, isn't it funny to hear Lincoln-related jokes in Peter's voice?
7 years ago. What's that mean?
Again, this bit about 7 years ago is funny.
I like it this way. You're gonna lose everybody from the first line. They're all doing math in their head.
But is it as funny as Moses commanding his people to stop bitching about Jolly Ranchers?
Commandment number 3. There are no more Jolly Ranchers. They're all gone.
The reason that the Moses stuff is funnier than the Lincoln stuff does lie mostly in the fact that Untitled Griffin Family History is an episode that is focused on its narrative and characters, while High School History is not. Another scene from High School History that I would like to overanalyze is the scene where Stewie parodies the movie Downfall, but with him getting mad about Captain Von Trapp from The Sound of Music. Once again, it's funny, but when you break it down, it's little more than take movie scene and replace Hitler with Stewie and replace war dialogue with Sound of Music reference dialogue. If we compare the Downfall parody to Untitled Griffin Family History's parody of old silent movies, we just get a little bit more out of the latter's parody. The Black Eye Griffin bits seem to be the perfect balance of an appreciation for and a criticism of old silent movie bits. And unlike the Downfall parody that just replaces some characters and dialogue from the scene they are parodying, the Black Eye Griffin bits are designed from the ground up to comment on a specific era of cinema. And I can't talk about Untitled Griffin Family History without talking about what might be the most iconic scene in it.
I did not care for The Godfather.
What?
Did not care for The Godfather.
So the I did not care for the Godfather scene happens towards the end of the episode when the sprinklers fill up the panic room and the family thinks they're going to drown. Peter has one last confession to make to the family in this moment, and that is that he thinks the Godfather insists upon itself.
It insists upon itself, Lois.
What?
It insists upon itself.
What does that even mean?
Now, the scene itself is not only funny because of its commentary on bad media analysis, but it also leans into the main theme of the episode, which is telling your family the things that you view as important before you die. And what makes the scene funny is that for Peter, that big secret is that he hates the Godfather. This sort of scene and all the humor that comes with it is earned by the narrative because of all the things I talked about earlier. High School History wouldn't have been able to achieve this sort of moment because it lacks all of the characterization that an episode like Untitled Griffin Family History has in spades. The ending bit where Brian reveals why he got sentenced to community service.
Turns out you can legally buy Jenna Ortega as many new bed sheets as you want. You just can't deliver them in person.
But like just about every other part of this episode, it doesn't reach the comedic highs of its predecessor. High School History is, in a lot of ways, not a completely garbage episode. In fact, it's actually the best anthology episode of this season. I was originally going to cover Playtime, the other 3-parody episode of this season, and decided that that episode was much worse than High School History, and that I wanted to criticize the better of the two episodes in order to challenge myself. And of course, you've got viewer DMs, which if you see my video about viewer mail episodes is just an atrociously unfunny episode. I wanted to talk about High School History specifically because I found some value in discussing a decent Family Guy episode like High School History and comparing it to an even more high-quality episode like Untitled Griffin Family History, so that I could examine the little cracks in High School History's writing that kept it just shy of exceptional. So for our next comparison, we will be looking at A Few More Ways to Die in the West from Season 24 and Peter's Progress from Season 7. As far as framing devices go, A Few More Ways to Die in the West simply doesn't have one. Unlike most episodes like this that have some sort of connection to the main Family Guy cast, A Few More Ways to Die in the West only shows you the story itself. This isn't on its own a bad thing, but there is an added value to having a framing device. One, that it adds to the focus of the narrative, and that it ties in the events of the episode to the main characters the show usually follows. Peter's Progress has a framing device of Cleveland's cousin being a psychic who tells Peter about his past life as the founder of Quahog in the colonial era. This connects the colonial Peter to present-day Peter by saying that it literally was him in a past life, and thus makes us more invested in the story itself. Again, there's nothing wrong with not having a framing device, but if you don't have one, then you would have to do the work in the narrative to make us care about this Old West version of Peter Griffin. And A Few More Ways to Die in the West just kinda doesn't do that. The problems with A Few More Ways to Die in the West are similar to the problems present in High School History, where it's just a bunch of jokes that are vaguely related to the time period.
I made all my money in not sharp enough bone saws during the Civil War.
And
a souffle and a fillet mignon. Sorry, these words just got here.
And
Thank you, man without teeth.
the story is kind of there, but almost non-existent. You have Old West Peter falling in love with Old West Lois, who is also a bandit, and there's some stuff with a betrayal with Old West Quagmire, Cleveland, and Joe. There's also a B-plot with an Old West Brian and Stewie, who are like trying to be actors or something, but then they open up a store, and then they look for gold. It's just all over the place. There is not one specific coherent narrative. Just kind of goes through the motions with certain Old West tropes until it's time for the episode to just kind of end. Peter's Progress, on the other hand, also has a bunch of jokes vaguely related to the time period.
No, we're off. It's Martin Luther Day.
And
Well, I'm one of the few guys in this town who isn't dying a slow, painful diarrhea death.
Griffin had to go through the extensive divorce procedure required by 18th century society.
But these jokes earn their place in the episode because they aren't the entirety of all the jokes in the episode. Like, when I was looking for the jokes to use as examples of jokes vaguely related to the period, it took me no time at all to find 3 jokes like this in A Few More Ways to Die in the West. Whereas with Peter's Progress, I had to pick them out amidst a bunch of other jokes that either aren't specifically period jokes or jokes that progress the story and tell you stuff about the characters. The story of Peter's Progress is also pretty simple. Old-timey Peter is in love with old-timey Lois, but the King Stewie sends Peter away and marries Lois himself. But even though it's simple, it's enough to work with the narrative it's trying to tell, especially when considering that it's a story about someone settling in the New World in colonial times. Something that sells this story quite well is how they portray Stewie in his king role and how they communicate that all of his decisions are based on personal insecurity.
He has a very, very small penis. It's like that one grape in the bunch that never got to be a grape.
These jokes are not only funny because it's satisfying to watch a powerful individual be taken down a peg, but it also deconstructs power itself through comedy by showing that powerful people often make decisions that hurt people based on personal insecurity. Peter's Progress is not as good of an episode as Untitled Griffin Family History. I think where Untitled Griffin Family History has Peter's Progress beat is in its framing, being that all of the bits in Griffin Family History mean so much more to Peter because of the stakes of why he's telling the story. And I think it's no coincidence that of the 4 episodes I've talked about so far in this video, there is a direct correlation between which episode is the funniest and which episode has the most focused story and strongest characterization. But there is something else all of these episodes have in common. and it's that they are each irregular episodes. They all involve some kind of alternate timeline version of the characters we know. And I think what separates the bad and good sorts of these episodes is how much the writers are using these alternate characters as a crutch for storytelling. Something that a period piece episode like these ones can do is give the episode a gimmick that can make the writers feel like they have a pass at needing to include a more coherent story. A problem that was present in SpongeBob's period pieces that I discussed in my How SpongeBob's Period Pieces Failed video, link in the description. And this attitude isn't present in Untitled Griffin family history. It is a little bit present in Peter's Progress, and it is completely present in High School History and A Few Ways to Die in the West. Season 24 of Family Guy had 4 irregular episodes. 5 if you count the Hallmark movie parody they did with the Hulu exclusive. So if we count those exclusives with the whole season, that gives us 5 out of 17 episodes of season 24 dedicated to these irregular episodes. A little less than 1 in 3 episodes. If we compare this to season 23, which has 20 episodes if you include Hulu exclusives, we only had 3 irregular episodes in that season, which makes it a little less than 1 in 7 episodes. So just 1 season earlier, irregular episodes were far rarer, though still much more prevalent than they were in the likes of seasons 4 through 8, which would have had maybe 2 max. But okay. We've talked so much about irregular episodes. Parodies, anthologies, period piece episodes, they all stick out in our mind as something that the show is overusing. But what does a regular episode of the show even look like now? Real quick before we get into the next chapter, I would like to give a thank you to my Patreon and channel members. If you'd like to support the channel and get your name up here, either join below for channel memberships or for Patreon, which has some extra perks. Check the link in the description. So while I have had a pretty negative opinion of a lot of modern Family Guy lately when it comes to regular episodes, I do think that season 24 has been a noticeable step up in quality. There were a couple of episodes that stood out to me this season, but the one I think illustrates my point of what a regular Modern Family Guy episode could look like is Friend's Best Man, which is an episode that revolves around Stewie being engaged to Rupert and choosing Chris as his best man over Brian. Like most Family Guy episodes, the plot is simply a loose way of setting up a bunch of jokes and cutaways, but when you have the plot do something with the character dynamics and relationships, it adds more entertainment value and makes the jokes funnier. The episode also has a B-plot revolving around Peter and Lois making a sex tape that gets out to the whole town, and they have to come to terms with being ashamed of that. Similar to the A-plot, the B-plot is willing to do something with its character dynamics, so the jokes related to those character dynamics can thrive. And it led to this episode having a good amount of laughs and a satisfying conclusion to both of its endings. To focus a bit more on the conclusion of the A-plot, it focuses a lot on Stewie's naivete, leaning into him being, a baby. The concluding scene where he says that he wanted it to be Brian who was marrying him and not Rupert seems weird at first glance, but the scene itself is able to sell you on this conclusion, because it communicates that Stewie doesn't really know what marriage is.
It's being roommates for life and going on adventures. Stewie, we already have that.
So it's able to use this awkward scene to conclude its story about these two guys having their friendship strained and coming to more of an understanding of one another. And then, so it doesn't alter the status quo too much, it has a quick little scene at the end that says they can't get married because they're a dog and a baby. I couldn't help but draw a comparison between this episode and the infamous Pregnant Stewie episode, which also had a story revolving around Stewie's friendship with Brian being strained. If you've never seen the Pregnant Stewie episode, lucky you if you haven't, that's the reason that Stewie does that in the episode. It's because he thinks him and Brian would be better friends if they had babies together. So with both of these episodes, you have generally the same story, with Stewie not understanding friendship very well due to him being naive, but also showing that Brian hasn't been as present as a friend to him. But with one episode, they focus much more on actually deconstructing that through an absurd plot, and in the other episode, that absurd plot kind of takes over. What I think we can learn from looking at these two episodes is that Family Guy has realized that there isn't any benefit to the shock value of some of its more infamous past episodes. And even though its episodes can still rely on shocking moments like the Peter Lois plot and a baby wanting his dog to marry him, this shock value is a bit more earned by the narrative. And I think what we can also learn from looking at all 6 of the episodes I've analyzed in this video, which is definitely an odd assortment when you look at them all next to each other, we can learn what the main issue with more recent Family Guy is, and how it's different from the Family Guy of years past, which is that this show, at its worst, just doesn't try very hard, and goes through the motions. And it's at its best when it actually focuses on its characters and the story. Now, there's a lot to consider even off of what I've discussed today in this video. First off, the show is still not perfect by any means. Even this season 24 episode I praised is far off in quality from the golden era of the show, due to it just having a lower amount of good jokes and lacking some of the focus that golden era episodes had. And when it comes to irregular episodes, they aren't always bad, but considering how the team behind the show seems to treat them as a crutch to pad the seasons, I wouldn't be expecting any great parodies like Griffin Family History or Family Guy Star Wars anytime soon. Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you want to see more Family Guy videos, you should check out my analysis of all the Family Guy Road to episodes. Or if you want to hear me discuss some absolutely atrocious AI Family Guy videos, you can click on this link right here. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you next time.